Good evening. Tonight we begin with something unexpected. Why you do not feel good enough, but not as you imagine. Nothing of grand self-help promises. This time, you'll just be you. Someone ordinary, living between the quiet moments of doubt
and the whispered certainties of inadequacy. So, before you settle in, like the video and subscribe. If this truly speaks to you, now adjust the light, breathe deeply, and let's traverse the centuries of human longing together. You are
7 years old, standing in front of your bedroom mirror, and something shifts. Perhaps it's the way your hair won't lie flat, or how your smile seems crooked compared to your sister's perfect grin in the family photo on your dresser. This is the first time you notice the gap between who you are and who you think you should be. The mirror doesn't lie, you tell yourself, but what you don't know yet is that mirrors only show surfaces, and you've just begun a lifetime of mistaking reflections for truth. Your mother calls from downstairs, her voice carrying that particular
note of patience wearing thin.
"You've been up here too long," she'll say, but you can't explain that you're trying to figure out why you look wrong, why your presence feels like an apology you haven't learned to make yet. The feeling settles in your chest like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples through every part of you that will echo for decades to come. This moment, this first recognition of your own supposed insufficiency, becomes the foundation upon which you'll build an entire architecture of never
enough.
You don't know it yet, but you're constructing a blueprint that will govern how you move through the world, how you love, how you work, how you breathe. Every room in this house of inadequacy will be carefully designed, each wall reinforced with collected evidence of your shortcomings, each window offering views only of what you lack. The mirror's first lie. The peculiar thing about this foundational moment is how ordinary it feels. There's no dramatic music, no thunderclap of realization, just a child staring at their reflection and finding it wanting. But ordinary moments, you'll learn, often carry the most extraordinary weight. They slip into your bones quietly, like winter, settling into old houses, changing everything from the inside out. You begin to collect proof. Your teacher's disappointed sigh when you mispronounce a word during reading time. The way your best friend chooses someone else for their birthday.
Party invitation list, the subtle frown your father makes when you show him your drawing, the one you thought was your masterpiece.
Each incident becomes a brick in the wall you're building between yourself and the world, between who you are and who you desperately wish you could be. The tragic irony is that the very sensitivity that makes you notice these moments, that allows you to read the subtle emotional weather of every room you enter, is also what makes you exceptional. But exceptional feels dangerous when you're 7, when all you want is to blend in, to be normal, to be enough. So you learn to see your gifts as flaws, your depth as dysfunction, your capacity for feeling as evidence of your fundamental wrongness. Years pass, and the mirror becomes your confessor, your judge, your constant companion in the ritual of self-examination. You develop techniques, strategies, ways of standing that make you look taller, expressions that hide the uncertainty behind your eyes. You become an expert in the art of appearing, but somewhere along the way, you forget how to simply be. The mirror reflects not just your image now, but your entire relationship with existence. Every glance becomes a negotiation with worthiness. Every reflection a reminder of the distance between your reality and your aspirations. You start to believe that if you could just fix enough things about yourself, adjust enough variables, optimize enough aspects of your being, then maybe, finally, you might be enough. But enough for what? For whom? These questions never quite form clearly in your consciousness because asking them might reveal the terrible answer, that perhaps the standard itself is an illusion, that perhaps the mirror has been lying all along, not about how you
look, but about what looking means. The comparison trap. Fast forward to your teenage years and suddenly the mirror multiplies.
Social media arrives like a funhouse filled with infinite reflections, each one showing you a different version of inadequacy. You scroll through carefully curated lives, comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel, though you won't hear that phrase for years yet. Right now, you just feel the ache of never measuring up. Your phone becomes a portal to perfection, and you tumble through it willingly, hungrily, like Alice falling down a rabbit hole made of other people's achievements. Here's a classmate's perfect family vacation. Here's an acquaintance's flawless skin. Here's someone your age already accomplished in ways that make your own efforts feel laughably small. The algorithm learns your insecurities better than you know them yourself, feeding you exactly the content that will keep you scrolling, comparing, diminishing. You develop new muscles, psychological ones, for the constant work of measuring yourself against others. It becomes as automatic as breathing. See something beautiful, feel inadequate, witness someone's success, inventory your failures, observe happiness, catalogue your own shortcomings. The comparison trap isn't just a habit now, it's become your primary way of understanding your place in the world. The cruelest part is how the trap disguises itself as motivation. You tell yourself that seeing others' achievements inspires you, pushes you to be better. Sometimes this is even true. But more often it simply reinforces the fundamental belief that you are lacking, that your natural state is insufficient, that who you are without constant improvement is somehow wrong. You begin to curate your own life with the same careful attention you pay to consuming others. Every photo must be perfect, every status update a testament to your best self. You become both audience and performer in the theater of comparison, simultaneously judging and being judged, measuring and being measured. The exhaustion is profound, but you mistake it for the natural cost of living. The comparison trap teaches you to see life as a competition where everyone else received better equipment, clearer instructions, more natural talent. You forget that you're seeing their edited versions while living your unfiltered reality. You forget that behind every perfect post is a person who, quite possibly, feels just as inadequate as you do, just as certain that everyone else has figured out something they're missing. The perfectionist's prison. Somewhere in your 20s, you discover what you think is the solution. Perfectionism. If you can just do everything flawlessly, if you can anticipate every criticism and preempt every failure, then surely you'll finally be enough. This feels like wisdom, like taking control of your destiny. You don't recognize it yet as the most sophisticated form of your original inadequacy dressed up in the clothes of ambition. You throw yourself into the work of perfection with the dedication of a monk pursuing enlightenment. Every project becomes a referendum on your worth. Every mistake feels like evidence of your fundamental flaws. You develop an internal editor so harsh that it would make dictators envious, and you give this voice unlimited power over your thoughts, your actions, your very sense of self. The perfectionist's prison is particularly insidious because it looks like success from the outside. You achieve things, you excel. People praise your attention to detail, your high standards, your unwillingness to settle. What they don't see is the cost, the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the way you've turned every aspect of your life into a performance where anything less than perfect feels like failure. You become addicted to the brief highs of flawless, execution, but like all addictions, the tolerance builds. What once felt like enough perfection now feels mediocre. The bar keeps rising, not because the world demands it, but because your internal worth meter has been calibrated to impossible
standards.
You're running on a treadmill that speeds up every time you find your rhythm. The most tragic aspect of perfectionism is how it convinces you that it's protecting you from criticism, from rejection, from the pain of not being enough. But in reality, it's just a more sophisticated way of never being enough. Instead of accepting your humanity, you've declared war on it. Instead of finding peace with your limitations, you've committed to a lifetime of fighting them. You start to notice that the things you're most proud of, the achievements that required the most perfectionist energy, often feel hollow once you've accomplished them. The praise feels nice but doesn't stick. The success feels temporary. There's always another mountain to climb, another standard to meet, another way to prove your worthiness. The prison keeps expanding, adding new wings, new requirements, new ways to fall short. The emotional pain motivator. And here, in this space of endless striving, you make a discovery that feels like enlightenment, but is actually the deepest trap of all. Emotional pain works. When you feel bad enough about yourself, when the dissatisfaction reaches a certain pitch, you finally have the energy to change. The worse you feel, the more motivated you become. It's like discovering fire, and just as dangerous. You begin to cultivate your dissatisfaction like a gardener tending roses. You learn exactly which thoughts will make you feel inadequate enough to take action. You bookmark the social media profiles that make you feel worst about yourself. You save the articles about people younger and more successful. You collect your failures like some people collect stamps, organizing them carefully for maximum impact when motivation is needed. This becomes your primary fuel source, the burning sensation of not being enough. It propels you through workouts you hate, through career moves that don't align with your values, through relationships that require you to be someone other than who you are. The pain works so well that you forget to question whether it's sustainable, whether it's healthy, whether there might be other ways to move through the world. You develop a sophisticated relationship with your own suffering. You learn exactly how much self-criticism will push you forward without completely destroying your confidence. You become a master of riding the edge between motivation and despair, like a surfer navigating dangerous waves. Sometimes you wipe out spectacularly, but you always climb back on the board because the alternative, sitting still with who you are, feels impossible. The emotional pain motivator creates a terrible paradox. You need to feel bad about yourself, to feel good about your efforts. Success becomes contaminated by the very dissatisfaction that drove you to it. You can't enjoy your achievements because they were born from self-hatred, and self-hatred is a mother that never stops demanding payment from her children. You notice that people who seem naturally content, who appear to accept themselves as they are, also seem less driven, less accomplished by conventional standards. This confirms your belief that self-acceptance is luxury you can't afford, that contentment is the enemy of achievement. You never consider that perhaps they've found a different kind of success, one that doesn't require constant warfare with their own humanity. The years accumulate like sediment, and the pain motivator becomes so central to your identity that you can't imagine who you'd be without it. The thought of actually feeling good enough terrifies you, because if you felt good enough, would you still strive? Would you still grow? Would you still be you? These questions hover at the edges of your consciousness like ghosts, too frightening to examine directly, but too persistent to ignore completely. You're building an entire life on the foundation of your own inadequacy, and the structure is starting to show cracks. But you can't stop building, because stopping would mean confronting the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you were enough all along. And all this work, all this suffering, all this careful cultivation of dissatisfaction has been an elaborate way of avoiding the simple, terrifying truth of your own inherent worthiness. The mirror still calls to you that 7-year-old's confessor, but now it reflects not just your image, but an entire worldview built on the premise of your insufficiency. You've become an expert in the architecture of never enough, a master builder of your own limitations. And somewhere, in the quiet moments between striving and achieving, between falling short and trying again, you begin to wonder if there might be another way to live, another foundation upon which to build a life. But that wondering feels dangerous, like questioning gravity or the necessity of air. So you turn back to the familiar work of not being enough, because at least in that space, you know who you are, someone who needs fixing, someone who must earn their place, someone who transforms pain into progress and calls it wisdom. The architecture stands complete, magnificent in its complexity, devastating in its effectiveness. You've built a house of mirrors where every reflection shows inadequacy, every room echoes with the sound of not enough, every window looks out onto someone else's greener grass. And you live there, faithfully, masterfully, exhaustingly, because it's the only home you've ever known. But tonight, something different whispers in the space between your thoughts. You're tired, not just physically, but tired in a way that sleep can't fix. Tired of carrying the weight of constant improvement, tired of measuring your worth against impossible standards, tired of living like you're always one achievement away from finally being allowed to exist peacefully in your own skin. You sit in your favorite chair, the one by the window where the evening light falls softly across your hands. And for a moment, you're not trying to be anything other than what you are. This moment feels revolutionary, though you don't yet understand why. You're about to discover that the very thing you've been running from, the simple fact of your unimproved, unoptimized, perfectly human self, might actually be the doorway to the peace you've been seeking. The passive self-improvement mirage you've spent years consuming content about bettering yourself. Your bookshelf groans under the weight of self-help volumes, each one promising to be the final key, the ultimate solution, the last book you'll ever need to read about becoming who you're meant to be. Your phone is filled with podcasts about morning routines and productivity hacks, meditation apps that gamify inner peace, YouTube channels that promise to transform your life in just 10 minutes a day. The irony is exquisite and painful. In your quest to improve yourself, you've become addicted to the idea of improvement without actually changing anything fundamental. You've confused consumption with transformation, information with integration, knowing about growth with actually growing. It's like believing you can become a swimmer by reading about water, or learn to love by studying the chemical composition of attraction. You notice this pattern one evening as you're lying in bed, scrolling through yet another article about the habits of highly successful people, and you realize you've read this same list dozens of times before. Wake up early, exercise, meditate, journal, read, network, optimize, hustle, repeat. The information hasn't changed and neither have you, but somehow you keep hoping that this time this particular arrangement of familiar words will finally be the catalyst for transformation. The passive self-improvement mirage is particularly seductive because it feels like progress. You're learning, you're engaged, you're working on yourself. But it's a kind of work that never actually requires you to confront the uncomfortable truth that maybe you don't need to be improved as much as you need to be accepted. Maybe the problem isn't that you're broken, but that you've been convinced you are. You begin to see how this passive consumption has become another form of the perfectionist's prison. Instead of trying to perfect your actions, you're trying to perfect your knowledge about how to act. Instead of being present with your actual experience, you're constantly looking for the next insight, the next framework. the next guru who will finally give you permission to be okay with yourself. The self-improvement industry has taught you to see yourself as a project, a fixer-upper, a work in progress that will someday, with enough effort and the right techniques, finally be complete. But what if you're not a project at all? What if you're more like a garden that needs tending rather than fixing, accepting rather than changing, appreciation rather than improvement? You start to notice that the people you admire most, the ones who seem genuinely at peace with themselves, don't talk much about optimization or life hacks. They don't have morning routines that sound like military operations or evening rituals that require spreadsheets to track. They just seem to be comfortably, unselfconsciously, humanly. This realization feels both liberating and terrifying. If you don't need to constantly improve yourself, then what do you do with all this energy you've been spending on becoming better? If you're already enough, then who are you? These questions don't have easy answers, but they point towards something radical, the possibility that your worth isn't something you earn through effort, but something you already possess simply by virtue of being alive. Distress tolerance as true strength. The breakthrough comes on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when you're feeling particularly inadequate about something trivial. Maybe you sent an email with a typo, or stumbled over your words in a meeting, or looked in the mirror
and noticed a new line around your eyes.
The familiar cascade of self-criticism begins, the well-worn mental pathways firing up to transform this small imperfection into evidence of your fundamental inadequacy. But this time, something different happens. Instead of immediately reaching for distraction or diving into plans for improvement, you just sit with the feeling. You let the discomfort exist without trying to fix it, analyze it, or make it mean something about your worth as a person. You breathe with it. The way you might breathe with a crying child, offering presents instead of solutions. This is your first taste of distress tolerance, though you don't have a name for it yet. You're learning that your ability to be with difficult emotions without immediately trying to escape or transform them is actually a profound form of strength. Not the kind of strength that conquers or achieves, but the kind that endures, that creates space, that allows things to be as they are without needing them to be different. You discover that most of your suffering hasn't been caused by the original problem, the typo, the stumbled words, the aging skin, but by your resistance to these perfectly normal human experiences. It's like the old saying about pain being inevitable but suffering being optional, except now you're understanding it in your bones rather than just your head. The practice becomes subtle and revolutionary. When anxiety arises about your performance at work, instead of immediately making lists of ways to improve or spiraling into worst-case scenarios, you practice sitting with the anxiety itself. You notice its texture, its temperature, its rhythm. You discover that emotions, when they're not fed by stories about what they mean, actually have natural life cycles. They rise, peak, and fall like waves, requiring nothing from you except your willingness to stay present. This is radically different from the emotional pain motivator you've relied on for so long. Instead of using difficult feelings as fuel for frantic action, you're learning to be with them as information, as weather, as the natural ebb and flow of human experience. You're developing what feels like a superpower, the ability to feel bad without making it mean you are bad. The irony is that as you get better at tolerating distress, you actually experience less of it. Not because your life becomes perfect, but because you stop adding layers of judgment and resistance to whatever is already happening. The original feeling, disappointment, embarrassment, fear, is often quite manageable when it's not amplified by shame about feeling it in the first place. You begin to understand that much of what you've called self-improvement has actually been elaborate forms of distress avoidance. The constant striving, the perfectionism, the endless consumption of better life content, all ways of trying to arrange your external circumstances so you never have to feel uncomfortable internally. But discomfort, you're learning, isn't the enemy. It's often just information, sometimes even a friend trying to tell you something important. The endless treadmill revelation. The revelation comes gradually, like dawn breaking, so slowly you don't notice until you're standing in full daylight wondering when the darkness lifted. You're scrolling through your photos from the past few years and you notice something strange. In every picture where you thought you looked terrible at the time, you actually look fine, more than fine. You look like a human being living a human life, which is to say, imperfect and beautiful and real. You remember being so self-conscious about your appearance in that photo from your friend's wedding, convinced everyone would notice how bloated you looked, how your smile seemed forced. But looking at it now, you see someone who was celebrating love, someone whose face shows the complexity of emotion that comes with witnessing joy. You look alive in a way that no amount of filtering or strategic posing could achieve. This pattern repeats as you scroll backward through time. The presentation you gave that felt disastrous actually shows someone passionate about their work. The vacation photos you almost deleted because you thought you looked tired reveals someone who was fully present for an experience. Over and over, you discover that your harshest critic, yourself, has been consistently wrong about what others see when they look at you. The treadmill revelation isn't just about appearance, though. It extends to every area where you've been chasing enoughness. The job you thought would finally make you feel successful led to a better job, which led to pressure for an even better one. The relationship you thought would complete you revealed new ways you felt incomplete. The fitness goal you thought would make you feel confident about your body was quickly replaced by a more ambitious target. You realize you've been running on a treadmill that has no final destination, because the destination was never actually external. The enoughness you've been seeking has always been a moving target, because it was never about achieving something, it was about accepting something. Specifically accepting the radical idea that you might already be enough right now without adding or subtracting anything. This realization is simultaneously liberating and disorienting. If the treadmill never leads anywhere, then what's the point of running? If you're already enough, then what drives growth, change, evolution? These questions don't have simple answers, but they point toward a different relationship with improvement, one based on curiosity rather than inadequacy, on joy rather than judgment, on becoming more yourself rather than becoming someone else. You start to experiment with this different kind of motivation. Instead of exercising because you hate your body, you try moving because it feels good. Instead of working harder because you fear failure, you try engaging because the work itself is interesting. Instead of being kind to others to prove you're a good person, you try kindness because it creates connection. The results are surprising. When you're not running from inadequacy, you have more energy for actual growth. When you're not using shame as motivation, you make choices that actually align with your values. When you stop trying to prove your worth, you start living as if you actually have some. The quiet revolution. And so, on this ordinary evening, as the light fades and your body settles into the familiar rhythm of approaching sleep, you find yourself in the middle of a quiet revolution. Not the kind of transformation the self-improvement books promised, with dramatic before and after photos and testimonials about completely new lives. This is subtler, more like a season-changing, barely noticeable day by day, but absolutely unmistakable when you step back and look at the bigger picture. The revolution is happening in the space between thoughts, in the pause before self-criticism, in the moment when you catch yourself about to apologize for existing and choose instead to simply exist. It's revolutionary precisely because it's so ordinary, so undramatic, so quietly radical in its simple acceptance of what is. You're learning that the opposite of not feeling good enough isn't feeling amazing about yourself all the time. It's not constant self-love or unwavering confidence or the ability to look in mirrors and see perfection. The opposite of not feeling good enough is feeling appropriately human. Sometimes proud, sometimes disappointed, sometimes confused, sometimes clear, always changing, always enough. This shift changes everything without changing anything. You still have the same job, the same relationships, the same face in the mirror, but the quality of your presence has transformed. You're no longer constantly braced against inadequacy, no longer using every interaction as an opportunity to prove or improve yourself. You're just here, showing up as you are, trusting that who you are is sufficient for this moment. The revolution spreads quietly through your days. You notice you're less defensive in conversations because you're not constantly protecting a fragile sense of self. You're more genuinely curious about others because you're not always comparing yourself to them. You make decisions more easily because you're not paralyzed by the need to choose perfectly. People start responding to you differently, though you can't quite put your finger on why. Maybe it's because when someone feels at home in their own skin, it gives others permission to do the same. Maybe it's because authenticity is so rare that even small doses of it stand out. Or maybe it's simply that when you stop performing worthiness and start embodying it, the whole world becomes a different stage. The mirror that once held such power over you becomes just a piece of silvered glass again. You look into it sometimes and see someone you recognize, not perfect, not fixed, not finely enough in some ultimate sense, but sufficient for this life, adequate for this moment, worthy of the space you occupy simply because you're occupying it. The revolution isn't complete. Revolutions never are. There are still days when the old patterns surface, when you catch yourself on the treadmill of never enough, when the comparison trap springs and catches you before you notice. But now these moments feel like weather rather than verdicts, temporary rather than permanent, information rather than identity. You understand now that feeling good enough was never about becoming someone else. It was about coming home to who you've always been, underneath all the striving and improving and trying. It was about recognizing that the house of inadequacy you built so carefully, so expertly, was never actually your home, just a place you were visiting while you figured out how to live. So tonight, as sleep begins to claim you, as your breath slows and your thoughts soften into dreams, you rest in this quiet revolution. Not because you've finally achieved enoughness, but because you've remembered what you somehow always knew but forgot along the way. That you were enough before you did anything, achieved anything, improved anything. You were enough when you were 7 looking in that mirror for the first time. You were enough in all the years of striving that followed. You are enough now, in this moment, breathing in this body, living this perfectly imperfect human life. The revolution is complete not because everything has changed, but because you've finally stopped trying to change everything. You've laid down the weapons of self-improvement and picked up the much lighter tools of self-acceptance. You've stepped off the treadmill and discovered that the ground beneath your feet was solid all along. Then I think you must already be dreaming about all of this. So I'll just leave the fireplace burning for you to feel comfortable and warm, knowing that in your dreams, as in your waking life, you are enough, beautifully, completely, quietly enough.